I'm Melinda. Welcome to the DNNDev XMod Pro user group for October. Every month we'll be having this meeting on the fourth Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. every fourth Thursday. Want to make sure we get that clear. 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and 7 p.m. British Standard Time. This session is recorded, and we'll record each one, and those will be available to watch on our DNNDev.com Google Plus page. So to the right of your screen, you'll see that there's a Q&A button that you can push, and if you do that, you can submit questions during the presentation, and the presenter will respond to any of your questions you have. I'll be monitoring that throughout the meeting, so if you do have questions, we should get to them. Also, there's a group chat button. That's if you want to make comments among yourselves. I will try to monitor that as well, but the best way to submit a question regarding the presentation is to do the Q&A button. So with that, I will hand this over to Kelly Ford, the president of DNNDev.com and the maker of XMod Pro, and have a good meeting. Kelly.
Thanks, Melinda. Let me set this up. There we go. How are you doing? It's October. It is pumpkin time, and orange and black is in the air, and people will be wearing long black hair and wigs and big noses and wearing makeup and banging on your door asking for candy. So if it's a big deal where you're at, we're offering you our Happy Halloween from DNNDev. It's our colors, so it's kind of our holiday as well. Today we have a number of things we'll talk about. Primarily, we're going to be changing things around a little bit. I plan on doing something kind of basic with databases, because XMod Pro is, as you know, it is the best way to get data from your database into your .NET Nuke application. And a lot of people come to XMod Pro without really knowing how to deal with databases. We have a built-in tool in XMod Pro that allows you to create a table in your database that you can use to query and hook up to your XMod Pro templates and forms. However, it's really meant as a prototyping tool. It's not what you want to use if you want to get performance or really go into production with something. So I'm going to show you a little bit about SQL Server Management Studio and kind of walk through how you would set up a table, stored procedure, and then we'll also talk about adding some indexes just so you can kind of get started in your SQL journey with XMod Pro. We also have Patrick Ryan with us today from Reflect Media Group, as always. And Patrick, it is good to see you with us once again.
You as well, Kelly. Thank you. Hello.
Right. And Patrick, what are you going to be talking about today?
I am going to demonstrate the difference between using the traditional XMod Pro method, using ControlDataSources, populating drop-down lists, populating another drop-down list from a selection of the first list, in comparison to using feeds and some jQuery to handle this without postback, without page refresh. So very simple demonstration showing the two ways to handle it.
That's good, because we're moving into have moved into kind of an AJAX world. A lot of websites still want a page postback because they don't trust the lessened security of AJAX. You have to take some precautions when you're doing that, but it's good to will be good to see some of the AJAX-based things that you can do in XMod Pro, and that's one of them. The drop-down list is really nice, so look forward to that. Until then, I will regale you with tales of SQL Server Management Studio. As you know, as I was talking about, XMod Pro is hooked up to SQL Server, and you're going to get most benefit from XMod Pro if you know your way around SQL Server Management Studio and start learning how to do some queries and maybe write stored procedures, etc. So I thought I would just take you, if you're new to SQL, then I would take on a brief whirlwind tour of SQL Server Management Studio. And first of all, I would start with this link here. If you don't have SQL Server Management Studio, then you can go to this page, and that should be opening up in a browser somewhere for you. And this will allow you to download the Express version of SQL Server Management Studio. This one's for SQL Server 2014, which is the brand new release from Microsoft now. Okay, let me paste that into the chat room then. All right, so there is the link. Did that go through?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so this is where you can download the Express version, which is free, and install it on your machine. I won't really go through the installation process because it's fairly straightforward. But we'll move directly into my Windows virtual machine here, and I'll kind of show you what I'm using. Actually, SQL Server Management Studio for 2012, and it's not the Express version, but what you see should be pretty much the same as what you see in your or what you see here on my screen. So let me just close out a couple of windows here, and I'll start sharing in a second. You can hear me furiously clicking. And make my screen smaller. Okay, almost there. Okay, let's go to share the screen now. Okay, can you see that? Okay. Yes? All right. Then we'll move on. This is the main window you're going to see in SQL Server Management Studio. It might not have all the databases that we have, but when you first open it up, it's going to prompt you for, actually, let me just do that. Exit, and then we will go to, oops, lots of other stuff up here too. Probably should close that out too. All right, so we'll open up SQL Server Management Studio. And when you first open it, it will prompt you for your credentials so that you can connect to a database. And it all depends on where your database is stored. If it's locally on your machine, then you can do what I'm going to do, and just, it should default to your server name. You could also type local if you want to. Then choose Windows Authentication, and then you don't have to put anything for username or password. You just connect. It'll connect to your local database. If you're connecting to a database on the web somewhere or elsewhere on the network, then your administrator should be able to give you the server name and the credentials to log in there. After you've logged in, you can see over to the left, only the thing we're concerned with most of the time, we could ignore almost all this stuff. That's mostly for DBAs, database administrators. We're just going to focus on databases. So open up that folder. It works much like Windows Explorer. And choose the database that you're interested in. You may only have access to one database, but it'll show you all the databases in that particular server instance. So we'll open up DNN732, one of my test ones, and we'll look at some of the folders here. First of all, I'm only going to focus on the ones that are of importance or that you're going to use most of the time. It's going to be tables, views, and programmability. Tables is obviously where your data tables are stored. Views are essentially precompiled queries against the database. So you could have a, say for instance, you have a query that joins two tables together, and you do it a lot. In that case, you probably wouldn't want to continue to rewrite that query. You just create a view based on that query, and then you can just reference that view as if it were its own table. And the third folder is programmability, and specifically here, I would focus on stored procedures and then functions. And functions you probably won't use very often. There are other things that you would get into as you progress in SQL Server and in T-SQL, Transaction SQL, which is the language of Microsoft SQL Server. But focus today will be on stored procedures, tables, and views. Let's go to tables first. If you open this up and it is a .NET Nuke database, you'll be able to scroll through and see all of the tables that are in the database. There are a ton of them. And if you don't really want to work on all of those, maybe your application has certain naming convention like my app something. So if that's the case, then when you're on the tables folder, you can click on this little funnel here to set up a filter, and you can type in, let's say I saw some tables in there prefixed with the word user. So you can just type in user for the name and click OK. And now you can see it's already filtered everything to only those tables that have the word user in them. And there are other types of filters you can use to get to what you want, because there can be a lot of tables and even more stored procedures that you might have to work through. So I find that the filter is a really effective way to navigate around SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so once you are here, you can take a look at any of the tables that you're interested in. Let's just talk about the users here, because that should have something in it. If you open that up, you'll be able to see all the columns in this particular table, and any keys, indexes, and keys are in these two areas. So this is actually a foreign constraint, meaning that if basically that certain data in your table has to sync up with data in another table. That's what the foreign keys are. And those are probably the only things you're going to worry about. But most of the time, you'll just simply right-click and choose Design if you want to modify the table. And this is fairly easy to add a column name to your table. Like, I really don't want to do this on the users table, and I would probably tell you not to as well. So, but you would just simply type in here and you would choose the column type and whether or not it allows nulls, which is a lot like the table tool that we have in XMod Pro. Let's go ahead, so we don't actually mess up the works. Let's add a new table. And to do that, just right-click on the tables folder and choose New Table. And you're presented with the same kind of screen where you can type in things like, let's just do contacts as a sample table. So we can type in the name of our column, contact ID, the data type. We want that to be integer. So we're going to scroll up to int. And we're not going to allow nulls. The reason is that we want this to be a unique column that is automatically generated by the database, that value that's going to go in there. And that's called an identity field. And so what we want to do is scroll down here in the column properties, choose identity, or is identity, and change that to yes. And that will change it. Now notice if we had this as before, we had allow nulls. If you go down here and you just double click is identity, if you watch the allow nulls checkbox, it'll uncheck because you cannot have nulls in this type of field. So this is the easiest way to have a unique value in your table that you can index on. And so now that we've set this to is identity, we still don't have an index, so let's go ahead and do that. It's really hard. It's probably one of the hardest things you'll ever do in SQL Server. Click that button, and you're done. And now your contact ID, you see the little key, that is now going to be the primary key field for your table. So we can add some other tables here, or other columns here, like first name. And that is going to be a text field. There are lots of different types of text fields that you can choose. Typically, you want to try to minimize the size of the field. So first name, probably 25 characters max. So we're going to choose in varchar, which is essentially variable characters, but the N stands for international. So it'll I don't know if that's actually what it stands for. That's what I think it stands for. N for international, of course, because international starts with an N, right? And the so basically any additional characters that are used by other language sets, or character sets for other languages, will be able to be used or stored in this field. That's what that means. If you really only want to focus on Latin, U.S. West Latin character sets, that type, then you could just choose varchar 50, which would be variable character of 50. The number in parentheses is the actual length of the field. So here we only want 25, so we're just going to edit it from 50 and type in 25. And that takes care of that. Let's do the same thing for last name. Also hit enter. So last name. And we don't want in char, because that would be not a variable length, but a set length. We want in varchar, and we'll set this to 25 as well. And notice I'm allowing nulls right now. That's up to you in your application whether or not you want to allow nulls. And a null simply is, it's not just an empty value, it is no value. So your application may or may not need that. Typically, if a field is required, you're not going to allow nulls. Then you could have something like, let's say, phone number, and that's also going to be an in varchar. We'll just start typing it out, and we'll just say that is 12 characters in length. Okay, that's good enough for now. You can have other different data types. You could say, let's see, is subscribed. Would be a Boolean column. So scribed. So a Boolean in SQL is actually called a bit field. And if you know anything about programming, a bit field is simply a 1 or a 0. It's on or off, true or false. So that it's a very small amount of space that you're taking. Just use bit. And XMod Pro incidentally will translate that to Boolean for you when you're working with your templates and forms. Okay, that's good enough for now. Let's go ahead and there's one other thing that I want to show you. Besides the primary key, which is always going to be unique, we figure that most people are going to search by last name in our context, so we want to make sure that this performs pretty well. And the way to do that is to add an index on this column. We could add indexes on virtually any column type. Not everyone, but most column types. But typically you don't want to do that because that will, the more indexes you have, the slower it will be when you go to add records and delete records, because that index or all of those indexes typically will have to be adjusted based on the changes you've made. So that'll slow things down quite a bit. So you're working for a happy medium. The index makes your searches much faster, but at the same time it has some counter effects like slow inserts, slow removals, things like that. So typically a couple of indexes are going to work just fine. Just try to find the ones that are most valuable to you. And in this case, we assume that people are going to search on last name. So to set this up as an index, we're going to mouse over to, not relationships, but the manage index and keys. Remember, this is the one we use to set the primary key for the contact ID column. And this is the one we're going to use to add indexes and keys. Indexes in this case. You'll see already that we have an index set. This is the primary key table _1. This is what was automatically created when we set the primary key on the contact ID field. And you can see the columns that are associated with this key. We can click on the More button here, and we can see the contact ID is the only column selected, and it's being sorted in ascending order, which works fine for numbers. Now, if we want to add our index on last name, then we'll click Add here. And it gives us a kind of a default name. We want to change that name to something that's unique. So we'll call it IX for index, and the name of our table, which is going to be contacts, and an underscore whatever field we're going to index on. This is my naming convention. It doesn't have to be yours. So this is what I do. And then go up to columns, click on More, choose the column we want to index on, which is last name. And we could choose either ascending or descending. Typically, you're going to use ascending. But if you had a date field, for instance, and you want to often do searches on those dates, you might want it in descending order because you want your newer records to come up first. So let's click OK. And we've added that index. While we're at it, why don't we go ahead and rename this primary key for the contacts. So we'll just say primary key contact key. And now we'll click Close. Nothing's happened yet because we haven't saved our database. You'll see it says Table 1 up here in the tab. We could either go over to the Properties table, or column, what is it, Properties panel, there we go, and set the name of the table here, or we could simply click Save, and it's going to prompt us for it. We'll call it Contacts. And click OK. Oops. All right, we'll call it Contacts 1. Hopefully I don't have too many of these tables in here. Contacts 1, there we go. Now, you don't see it over here in your list because we filtered it, and also SQL Server Management Studio doesn't automatically refresh this list. So what we're going to do is take off our filter. We're just going to clear it, click OK, and then we're going to scroll down, and we see that Contacts 1 is right here. Here are the columns that we've created. You'll see the primary key for contact ID. If we look at keys here, we'll see the primary key, contact ID key, a lot of keys. And then if we click on indexes, we'll see not only the primary key index, but we'll also see the index that we created. And because we know that people are going to have multiple last names, there are a lot of Fords in the world, for instance, this is not going to be a unique index. And that's pretty much it for creating tables and setting indexes so you get better performance. That'll automatically happen behind the scenes, and you don't have to do anything about it. There are lots of other different types of indexes. There are full text indexes, and those might require maintenance going forward, but full text indexes are really great if you want to search a body of text, for instance, and we may talk about that in a future session. Next, let's just do a couple of things. You can manually edit data in your newly created table. We'll just right-click and choose Edit. Yours will probably say Edit 200 rows. I've modified my SQL Server Management Studio to let me edit all rows, but since there aren't any rows in our new table yet, we will get a view something like this. You'll notice that under Contact ID, it's set to null, but it's also kind of gray. That means you're not allowed to edit it. So you could try. Doesn't matter how hard I type, it won't do anything. So for the others, though, we can add information like George Washington, and that would be 111-1111 1-1111. There we go. And he is subscribed, so we'll type in a 1 there, and I'm just going to down arrow, and that record has been added. We'll also do Ellie Ford. I don't know who that guy is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Yes, that's my real number, and you can call me anytime. And we'll type in a 0 because I'm not subscribed yet, and that'll translate to false. So we've got 2 records. Let's make one more. We'll call it George Bush, and his number is 999. Good enough, and he is also subscribed. Now, let's see if we can get some data out of this. First of all, we're in edit mode, so we can see what data is in all of these tables by simply right-clicking our table again and doing select. It'll probably select top 1,000 rows in your view, but we'll select all rows. And this is read-only. It just tells you what is in the table, and you can see the records have been added. If we were to do a similar thing on one of the .NET Nuke tables, we would see, I think HTML text might have some stuff in it. Select all rows there, and you can see there is 1 here. And so you can do that for any of the tables, of course. But we are here to learn a bit more about querying. So how would we do that? We want to retrieve all of the records who have a first name of George. So we'll do that. That's a nice simple query. To do that, first thing we need to do is look at this drop-down list. This is the currently selected database that you're working with, and it says master here, and it usually defaults to master. You don't want that because we're actually working in DNN 732, so choose that from the drop-down list. And now we can click New Query, and it'll bring up an empty window for us. And if you have any experience with XMod Pro, you'll know how to do a select. So I'll type this out. Let's do select all from contacts 1. And say it with me. How are we going to select that? It'd be where first name equals George. And to execute this, we simply click execute. And now we can see that works. So this is a great way to test out your queries when you're working with XMod Pro before actually, without having to go through the whole process of typing it into your template and then reloading the page. You can essentially pre-test your queries in SQL Server Management Studio and see what comes up. That way you know things are working correctly. You also can turn this into a stored procedure. So what I'm going to do is do that right now. I'm just going to copy the query we created. It's not a very useful query, I grant you, but it's good for an example. So we're going to scroll down, and we're going to go to Programmability and Stored Procedures, and we got a ton of stored procedures here. All I'm going to do is right-click on Stored Procedures and choose New Stored Procedure. Now, all of this text that comes up is meant to help you, but I find it's just confusing. So I'm going to delete it. And all you need to do to create a stored procedure, first of all, make sure that your database is selected up here in this drop-down list. And then type in these commands: create procedure, and then the name of your procedure. Typically I put in DBO dot because that's what I happen to be working on. You see all the DBOs, the schemas here in our database. So DBO, and then the name of our stored procedure, which is going to be find George. And we can hit space, and I'm going to type in as. So below the as is what's going to be our stored procedure. I often will type in begin and end. These are constructs in T-SQL. Basically, it says, hey, this is a block. I've got multiple statements within this block. So execute those statements as a block. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually just paste in our query from before, and this is all we need to create this procedure. So I will execute, and it says the command completed successfully. I will also refresh the stored procedures list, and we'll go through and see if we can find it. You can also just start typing, so we'll do F for find, whoops, down here, F for, oh, all right, I guess it's not going to work. I have no idea why. Scroll up, G, F comes before G, they tell me. There are lots of G's in here, lots of gets. Okay, there it is, there's find George. And so we know it's there. If we wanted to modify it later, let's just assume that we're finished here and we close this out. We're not going to save it as a separate file. We want to go back and modify the stored procedure. We'll right-click and choose Modify. And then it'll automatically create all the surrounding SQL commands that we need. And it's going to say Alter Procedure instead of Create Procedure like we did before. If we wanted to add a parameter to this, so let's just say we want to be able to search by any name, not just George, because that's stupid. Who wants to do that? We will put in a parameter like at first name, and that has to be the same size as the actual column name. And if I remember correctly, that was in varchar 25. So once we have that, that means that we have to pass in the stored procedure, or pass in first name to the stored procedure, and it can't be any longer than 25 characters. We'll just modify our query here to use that parameter. And now we're saying select all from context where the first name equals whatever you pass in. And we have alter procedure here, so this will modify it. I'm just going to click execute. It's completed successfully. And next, how do we test this? Well, we'll go right-click on our stored procedure again and choose execute stored procedure. This will bring up a dialog in which all of the parameters you have identified will be listed here, and you can pass in values to them. So you can even pass in null values, and if you have an output parameter that might, pass back a new ID, for instance, then you can specify that here if it doesn't automatically pick that up. So we're not going to pass in a null value at this stage. We're just going to pass in George first as our value. Click OK. And Management Studio will go ahead and generate the SQL that we need to execute that stored procedure. So we save a lot of typing. Let's take a look at it first. Most of this you can ignore. The declare, return value, this is just kind of standard boilerplate for SQL. It's just going to return this value here, 0, meaning there weren't any errors. Typically that's what it means. And then it's going to have the exec command, and then it's going to pass in the return value parameter it created, and it's going to call the find George stored procedure, and it's going to pass in this parameter. So we know that it works for George because we see here record number 1 and number 3 are both George. So now all we have to do is we can just replace George with Kelly, and we can see that, hey, the stored procedure is working because it's doing Kelly. What if we choose Melinda? Good, there is no Melinda, we know that, and no records are returned. So this is a quick and easy way to test your stored procedures. If either they're not working correctly, not returning the data that you expected in your XMod Pro templates, you can come over to Management Studio and execute the stored procedure and put in lots of different test data and see what comes back. And that, a lot of times it's going to help you determine what's wrong, or at least pinpoint where the problem might be happening. And I'm going to leave it at that because that's quite a bit to take in. We will explore SQL and SQL Server Management Studio and how it interacts with XMod Pro more in coming sessions. For now, I hope you enjoyed this, a nice little basic intro to SQL Server Management Studio and SQL. With that, if you have questions, of course, I'm happy to answer them. If not, we can move on to Patrick and what he's doing. Patrick, you're around?
I am here.
All right, good.
Sorry about that. Had closed some windows.
All right. So remind everybody again, what are you doing?
First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And hello again, everyone. Patrick Ryan here with Reflect Media Group. And what I'm going to be demonstrating is very simple, and please let me know if you can see my screen. But there is two examples on this page, and what I'm going to demonstrate is how do you take the traditional method of using a control data source to pop, and within that drop-down list, it also populates another drop-down list. I'll show you that, the traditional method. And that does create a postback, so you're going to have a page refresh. And you can also utilize jQuery and feeds to perform that same functionality, but without a postback, without a page refresh. So I'm going to walk us through both of the examples and show you the difference between the two, and also a few notes on suggested security, because again, and we've talked about this previously, but feeds by nature are public, and when you're using them to access data, you have to be careful and you have to know what roles are allowed to see that data, to execute the feed, and so just keep that in mind. When you're using feeds, you either secure them or you make them public. So you can't see my screen. Am I good?
You're good, Patrick.
All right, thank you. All right, so here's the top one. I've got two tables here. I've got a customer table and a customer address table. Very simple, and this doesn't actually do anything other than show off the functionality. But let's say I select a customer, and we'll select John Doe. The page will refresh, and the select address list is populated with 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, and 3, 4, 5 John Doe. If we select George Washington, funny there. Another page refresh, and we've got George Washington's address, and like Kelly said, that was his phone number. This is his real address if you want to mail him a thank you letter. Again, here's Jimmy John, and you get the point. We've got some page refreshes going on. Now, down here, we've got the same functionality, but it's very fast. It utilizes feeds and jQuery, so we're going to select John Doe. Boom, there's his addresses. We select Jane Doe, they change instantly, George Washington, and so on. And there's Jimmy John. Pretty cool. So you can imagine if you've got multiple drop-down lists, if you've got combinations of one drop-down list affecting another drop-down list, if you've got a bunch of these, it can be kind of a bad user experience nowadays to have a bunch of postbacks. But with jQuery and feeds and Ajax, you can perform a lot of this in really, really cool ways and pretty much have complete control over your data. So let's crack this thing open and look at a few things. Here is our top one. Let's take a look. I'm going to try to increase my screen size. There you go. Let's, oops, I've messed something up here. Click outside of here. Hang on one second, guys. Oh, that was ugly. Okay. Let's try that again. All right, here we go. So we're not using the submit command. We can ignore that. But here's our control data source for customers. So we've got a control data source with an ID of CDS_customers. And we've just got a SQL query that says select customer ID. And I'm concatenating the first and the last name as a dynamic parameter called full name. And from the customer table, order by customer ID. And we have another control data source for the customer here, and that is select address ID, customer ID, and the address from the customer address table, where customer ID equals parameter, the @ customer ID. And that parameter is getting its value from the actual drop-down list when the value changes. So we've got the parameter name is customer ID, and its associated data type. So we can't get the customer address until we select a customer. So if we go down here to our first drop-down list, we can see the drop-down list ID customer, data field customer ID, and where is it going to get its values from? The data source ID is the CDS_customers. That's the name of our control data source. The value that we see in the text box, the actual visible part, is going to be the full name. The value is the customer ID. And we're using the data source, so we're going to append data-bound items, true, and data type is int32, and we also want this to affect our other drop-down list, so the target control ID is the ID of the other drop-down list. That's going to be for our addresses, and the target data source ID is the control data source CDS_customer address. Remember that we need to send data back to that query to get our addresses, and the parameter name again is customer ID. So when this changes, it's going to send the data to the other control data source. It's going to send the value of customer ID, and that data source, that data is going to change based on the parameter that's sent to it. And following that is your postback, your page refresh. And when the page refreshes, our drop-down list for customer address is now populated based on the customer address control data source. So that is your traditional method. And I want to make a note of this here. Notice the naming conventions within XMod Pro, and a lot of this is just ASP.NET stuff. But you've got, it's called drop-down list and then list item. However, if we look by using inspect element, and we look within the document object model, you can see that this has been translated to a select, which is the actual HTML5 tag. It's a select tag. And you can see the on-change events that XMod Pro does for you that handles those different control data sources and populating your other drop-down lists. And within here, the list items are translated to options, which is as well just traditional option tags. So you can see our value 1, our value is the customer ID, and then the text is the customer's name, and so on. So now this is on the client, and when I say on the client, I mean me, the person that's viewing the page. And so knowing that, we can use the most popular web programming language out there, JavaScript, and its lovely partner library jQuery to do some really cool stuff and generate these and insert them into the page. All right, so let's go down here and look at our demonstration with the feeds. All right, so the only control data source I now have is the first one, the customers. We don't need any other control data source because our control data source is essentially going to come from a feed. So this is the same as the other, and oh, that's right. I'm going to use XMod Pro's client name, and I've assigned that as customer. I'll explain that in just a second. That just simply makes accessing your controls based on their ID a whole lot easier. So let's see. We've got down here our drop-down list, and that's where you select a customer. We've got the data source on there. We took off the other stuff. We don't need it because we're not going to utilize that to populate the other drop-down. And down here, we've got our drop-down list for customer address, and the only thing I have in there is just a temporary value of select address. Nothing else. Don't need anything else. And take note of the ID of the drop-down list is customer address. So what do we need to do here? We need to fire off a function when this changes. When this drop-down list value changes, we need to do something to where we can populate this one. So this is really cool. So if we go down here, we've added a jQueryReady tag. And if you watch the last user group session, we talked a lot about this and a lot of the details. So I encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, please go watch that video. But this is basically just says, hey, when the document's ready, we're going to perform some things. And I'm using a jQuery selector, and I'm using the client name, customer, that we assigned to our form, .customer. This is the ID of the drop-down list. And when it changes, we want to do something. We want to perform a function. The first thing that we need is we need the customer ID, because we're going to have to pass the ID of the customer to the feed, which does the query based on that customer ID. So we want to know what that is. So we're going to say this value. Well, the value is an integer. It's the customer ID. So we're using a function to parse that as an integer value, just to be explicit. So we're saying whatever this value is, make sure that its data type is an integer. All right. So CID equals the customer ID of whatever is the selected option on the drop-down list. Next, we have a AJAX call. Let me clean that up a little bit. That drives me crazy. And in this AJAX call, we've got a URL. Well, what are we calling? We're going to be calling a feed.aspx. So here's the URL to get to feed.aspx. And we're going to send a post request to that feed. The data type that we're going to be dealing with is HTML. Other data types like JSON or XML or different things like that, you would change that there, but we're just using HTML. And we need to send a data object that has some key value pairs within it. So we're creating a data object here, and these two are absolutely required. XFD is for the feed name, and I've called the feed RMG demo get addresses. XMod Pro feed.aspx requires the portal ID, and in this case it's just a default portal. I'm just putting in 0. And CID is the customer ID, and there's a variable CID. You can see it here. We're passing that along into this AJAX request. When this is successful, it's going to return back a data object to us. So we've got data right here in function data. And once we've got that data, we can use jQuery again to find our customer address dropdown. And we just say we want the HTML inside of that to be the data. So that could be pretty much anything you wanted to utilize it for. So just take this into consideration, whether it's a drop-down list or an ordered list with LI elements, whatever that HTML, whatever the inner HTML of that is, that's what we're going to handle. So again, we call the feed, we send the data to it, and on success, we populate our customer address select list with the data. So let's look at the feed itself. And let's see, let's go to our control panel and go to our, feeds, and here is our feed. Okay, very simple. And let's talk about security real quick. Right now this feed is public to the world, and that basically means if anyone anyone can call that feed and get all the addresses to whatever customer they want. So if you wanted to secure this, you would use view role and assign that to administrators or registered users or whatever roles that are appropriate, and then the feed will obey the security parameters that you set up for that. You've got just like a template, you've got a list data source, and the command text is we want to select address from RMG demo dropdown customer address, where customer ID equals the parameter customer ID. And we have to give that customer ID a value, and that value comes from our form post. So you've got a parameter name, customer ID, value equals, we've got single quotes, double open bracket, form, colon, CID. If you remember, when we were setting up our AJAX call, we called that CID in the key. And the data type is an int32 value. So this is going to bring us back results. And if you remember, I was showing you the difference between list item within the XMod Pro editor interface as well as the actual HTML that's rendered to the client. Well, the HTML that's rendered to the client was options. So I could go in here and have this, option value equals something, but for simplicity's sake, we've just got option, address, and then the close option. We don't really need a header template. We don't need a footer template for this. And we're just plopping in the address right there. So when that feed is called, it's got an item template, and it will populate as many items as it finds. So that basically brings us back the different options. So going back to our page, and as simple as it can be, John Doe, Jane Doe, George Washington, and Jimmy John. So that's about it for that. Very simple, and once you get the hang of that, you can utilize this in so many cool ways. But again, keep in mind, always remember the security that's related to feeds. They are publicly visible unless you state otherwise. So if there's any questions, I'm glad to answer. If not, I am all finished.
I thought maybe it might be good to clarify a couple of things in your feed. Could you go back there?
I can.
And it's not really clarification, it's just a kind of a jumping off point for some of the discussions. But I wanted to draw everyone's attention to the data type that Patrick set here. He set it to int32 for the form CID parameter. And that's important. You can't always do this, but whenever you can, it's very important to use a numeric value if it's going to be passed in from the public. You kind of have to treat everything outside of XMod Pro or anything you're programming really as potentially dangerous. And so the more you can defend yourself against that, the better off you're going to be. If your data type was string or it wasn't specified, then it's still probably wouldn't be able to be possible, but you leave yourself a wider opening for attack, all depending on how you create your stored procedures and whether or not you're using dynamic SQL, etc. But I just think that setting a data type to a number that's being passed in is a good best practice to help protect yourself against SQL injection attacks. The other thing I wanted to point out, or actually I wanted you to see if you could add a value to the option tag there so people could see the difference. Typically when you're using any of XMod Pro's tokens in any of XMod Pro's tags, you have to surround it by the single quotes, as Patrick's done here in the parameter tag. But when you're dealing with actual HTML, then you don't. You can use, because it's all rendered on the client, that's not a big deal. He can actually set a value there and use double quotes around his field token. Now let's take a look at that, how it's rendered.
Kind of weird having my screen blown up this size. Watching the previous video, everything was so tiny, I thought I'd solve that this go around. All right.
Okay, good.
There it is.
So a lot of people, I mean, you could use single quotes there, but typically people want their HTML to conform to HTML specs, although technically in HTML5 you don't even have to have quotes, so I don't know how important that is anymore, but you feel free to use double quotes whenever you're dealing with an HTML tag like that. Patrick,
Just lost your mic, Kelly. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm back on. Sorry about that.
There you are.
Did you hear all the? You obviously heard all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I was saying, excellent demonstration, as always. Thanks again for your time and effort in this. I hear that you might have a project in the works. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'm assuming you're talking about the book.
I am so excited about this thing. Yes, tell me about the book.
You're excited about the book? Well,
Yes.
I'm excited about it too, and it's going to be called Discover XMod Pro. And the reason I'm doing it is I am pretty much the master of copy, paste, view, tweak, change, until I eventually come up with the results that I'm looking for. And you know, there is a learning curve to XMod Pro. It's not a really big learning curve, but I feel that it has been an unearthed gem to be fully shown to the whole world. And what I mean by that is I've learned so many things. I mean, XMod Pro, and I've said this before, has been a silent tutor for me. teaching me how to program, going from basics to advanced things, and now programming in Visual Basic, and along with lots of JavaScript and lots of other things. And I thought, how can I take the knowledge that I have, the knowledge that I've acquired, and formulate it in such a way that it would be easily digestible to a beginner or even a novice or someone that's advanced. And I believe the best way to learn is by doing. The best way to learn is by actually building a fully functional application. So what I want to do, and what I've started working on, is Discover XMod Pro, where it's literally going to teach you the basics from installing XMod Pro to building a fully functional web application, all the way into some advanced techniques. And it will cover pretty much all of the features of XMod Pro, features that are outside of XMod Pro, a lot of SQL and SQL Server stuff, as well as JavaScript and jQuery and how to utilize everything together, covering templates, forms, feeds, and more. And that will be, it's just a really cool project. And we're going to offer the first few chapters for free. And I may even offer a early buyer's discount where you can purchase it early and get the chapters as they come in. But I am also, it's a great time if you are listening to this user group, or if you watch it later, if you have ideas or things that you want to learn, feel free to email me because I will highly consider putting those within the book. The book will be mixed media. It will be text, images, pictures, and video. I'm not going to leave any room for confusion. You're going to be very comfortable throughout the book, and it's going to walk you through step by step. So very exciting. You'll have a fully functional, complete application, probably built out throughout a weekend. And with that knowledge, you should be able to build just about anything you want, taking bits and pieces and parts and referencing the book and referencing what you already built, as well as there's going to be some advanced pages, advanced chapters that are in addition to the book, and as well as some discounts on some of the plugins like the Exile, Ajax file uploader, and stuff like that that'll go along with it that we'll be using along with the book. So very excited about that, Kelly. And
I mean, the reason I was really excited about it is, and most people who will be watching this, anybody who's a member of the community, the XMod Pro community, will recognize, and you can even see it here on your Reflect Media test page. You have a really good sense for design, good clean design, and your products have a similar kind of aesthetic, and people are starting to discover your products as well. And of course, you've been very helpful to people in the community on our website, as well as here in the monthly user group meetings. But what's most intriguing for me is that you really started out, and I think as you described it, you were able to copy and paste script, JavaScript here and there to make something happen, but you didn't really have a lot of experience before that, right?
That's correct. I started with, I shamefully admit this, I just told you the name. I forgot the name of it. I used some, anyway, it's ancient, but I got started with .NET Nuke back in, I think, 2004 or 2005, somewhere in that neighborhood. I can't remember what version it was, but it was really cool because I could easily create a website, and it had all the parts in there, and you could go to someone and go like, hey, look, I can create a website and for a client, and they can modify their own content. This is a content management system, and if you know Microsoft Word, you can edit things. Well, it started like that, and there I was in that Microsoft Word interface trying to make stuff look good all the time, and driving me crazy. And then eventually I'd go into the source view and start looking at HTML and really learning HTML aside from tools and interfaces. And then I thought, hey man, look at this. It's the DNN store, or snow cover back then. If a client needed a business directory, well, I could buy it and install it in within minutes, and boom, it's done. Or if a client needed a form, I could buy XMod Pro or XMod, and boom, it's done. But what happens is I always had this feeling of being inside a box. If you purchase a third-party module, you're within the bounds of that third-party module settings and its functionality, along with their opinionated design aesthetics on how things are going to look and function. And so then you get a client that comes along and says, oh man, hey, I love this business directory, but I want to add this feature. Well, then you're in big trouble, because if the compiled module, which doesn't give you any access to the code, doesn't have that feature, you got to go to the developer, and hopefully that developer is still around, because hey, things happen. People change paths. They may not be around, and you're stuck with a client. You're stuck with a module that you can't upgrade, and now next thing you know, you've got .NET Nuke upgrades that are critical upgrades, but your module's not upgradable, and you've just got lots of problems. So then then comes along XMod Pro, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. So now I can build essentially modules, my own modules with XMod Pro in a fraction of the time as compared to creating traditional .NET Nuke modules. Very fast, very efficient, and it starts with simple things like, okay, I'm going to create a table, and I'm going to put some data in those tables, and now I can do that. Cool. Well, now I want to do something else. Well, then you learn to do something else. And my particular personality, I guess it's a blessing and a curse. I am an absolute perfectionist in everything. So if I
can testify to that.
Yeah. So if a column is out of place, or if one pixel is off, I don't rest until I fix it. I can't. And in the same thing, when I've showed you guys in one of the sessions, local event ads, the messaging feature within the classifieds. Well, I don't want something looking like some boring table. I want it to look like an iMessage. And how do I do that? Well, I don't have any idea, but I'm going to work on it and spend a week or however long it takes to figure it out. Well, I don't like the way page refreshes when I select an item from a drop-down list. Well, how do I deal with that? Well, I learned how to do something cool with feeds not too long ago. How can I handle it in this method? So basically, I'm a workaround master. So I'm always finding workarounds and ways to accomplish things that I want to accomplish, because this day and age, people they expect modern web applications. They want a modern interface. They want things to be fast. They don't want postbacks and page refreshes. And that's why XMod Pro, as my silent tutor, led me into programming. I got into Visual Basic, and wow, what do you know? A lot of the syntax and syntax sugar of XMod Pro is highly resembles Visual Basic. Go figure, as it was written in Visual Basic. So things began to make sense, and putting things together. Next thing you know, I'm creating plugins. I'm programming plugins. So here's the Exile MailChimp plugin, OrphanX, which is pretty cool, and I've got lots more that I'm working on. But I've learned enough. I'm doing this professionally now. This is something that we do this for clients. We don't buy modules, and we build everything in XMod Pro. I don't have to rely on anything but XMod Pro. And if I want something that's beyond the scope of XMod Pro, I build a custom form action, a template tag, or whatever to do so. And so anyway, I'm going to take all that passion, all that hard work, the years of learning, and I'm going to compile it into something to where I'm going to teach you guys how to build a fully functional web application from start to finish that covers most, if not all, the features of XMod Pro over a weekend. And have those advanced chapters and stuff as well. Anyway, I've got lots of ideas, and I'm going to be working on those things. And keep an eye out for notifications. I think Kelly's going to include a notification in the DNNDev newsletter once the initial part of the book is ready, and you can follow along and pre-order at a discounted rate, and really take XMod Pro to the next level. So.
Well, you can certainly hear the passion just hearing you talk about how you came from essentially not knowing much to getting to a point where you're actually doing server-side programming, all the CSS and JavaScript, and creating custom extensions for XMod Pro. That's great, and I know, because I've worked with you often, that you do have a great attention to detail, and that's why I'm excited about this. Right? I anticipate, and maybe I'm putting too much pressure on you, but I anticipate a nice, clean, attractive book that's well laid out from a user perspective that kind of follows along. You understand what it's like to just face XMod Pro to begin with without any knowledge, and then leverage everything that you learn in XMod Pro to become, well, as you said, doing this professionally. So that's really exciting for me, and we can't wait. I know that Gerald has posted in our Q&A section. He says, "I'm quote unquote in all caps stoked about the book. Just what I need. So
That's great.
I think you're going to find a lot of excitement about it, and we're excited about it. So keep us up to date on what's happening with the book, and we look forward to it.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap things up for this session, this user group session for October. And I just was made aware that the fourth Thursday in November is probably not going to happen because, well, obviously the day will happen. I'm canceling Thursday. It will happen. It just happens to fall on Thanksgiving here in the U.S., and so we won't be doing a session then. However, we're going to try to schedule around it either before or after Thanksgiving, not on Black Friday, or maybe, I don't know, if you don't want to engage in Black Friday shopping, then maybe you could join us for that. But there's good football around there too, so maybe not. We'll figure out a date still in November. It just might be earlier than we normally would. So please keep an eye out, an ear to the ground for our Twitter feed. That is at DNNDev. And you can also, of course, keep an eye out on our Google Plus page. Please follow us, and we'll keep you up to date as to when the new meeting will happen. And we'll also keep you up to date as what's happening in the DNNDev world, or the XMod Pro world with Patrick's book and all the other plugins that I know about that you don't quite know about yet that are coming down the line. So anyway, thanks again for joining us. We love the fact that you have and that you're interested in learning more about XMod Pro. If you have any ideas or questions or suggestions for future topics for user group meetings, please let us know. And please, we really would like to have you on the show with us. If you have something you would like to present, or if you've built something with XMod Pro that you'd like to show off, just let me know. It's Kelly. Sorry, it's not Kelly. Well, that's my name, but my address is kford, K-F-O-R-D, at DNNDev.com. So send me a line and say, hey, I'd like to say something in the user group. We'll get you on. That'll do it. Thanks again, and we will see you next month. Bye.